Yes.
This is BBC News with Poppy Whitworth and me, Zach White. The headlines at 1 o'clock. Most one thing, Napoleon's army has been routed by British, Dutch and Prussian forces south of the Belgian town of Waterloo. We'll be bringing you the very latest from central Belgium. Also on the programme.
Europe euphoric. As news of this result spreads across the continent, we'll be reporting on the reaction in UK, Brussels and in Paris. And the Emperor ridiculed, contemporary art analyst Daniel Schuster will be joining us to discuss what the latest caricatures suggest about the popular reactions to this result.
Hello and welcome to BBC News. I don't think it would have done if I had not been there. Those were the words of the Duke of Wellington earlier today, commenting on his latest victory. The smoke is now clearing on the battlefield in which British, French, Dutch and Prussian forces fought a 9-hour-long battle at Mont Saint-Jean, south of Waterloo, on the 18th of June.
This development marks the culmination of a 4-day campaign, which has had the world on tenterhooks as the fate of Europe has hung in the balance. For days since the 15th of June, it had appeared that Napoleon held the initiative after he defied expectations of a flanking manoeuvre and made a daring lunge for Brussels down the axis between the British and Prussian forces in a bid to encircle the Allies.
This move left Wellington claiming that he had been humbugged, and the desperate twin battles of Quatre Bras and Ligny on the 16th of June resulted in stalemate between Ney and Wellington, whilst the Prussians executed a controlled withdrawal. Napoleon held the initiative, but failed to act quickly enough to ensnare Wellington, who withdrew from Quatre Bras to the ridge of Mont Saint-Jean on the 17th.
In a move which demonstrates the strength of the alliance between the two armies, Marshal Blucher, the commander of the Prussian forces, decided not to withdraw along his own lines of communication, but instead moved parallel to the British as they retreated towards the Belgian capital of Brussels.
Communications between Wellington and Blucher resulted in Wellington agreeing to fight at Mont Saint-Jean on the condition that the Prussians marched to his aid.
On the night of the 17th to the 18th, a thunderstorm raged in the skies above central Belgium. This claimed to play a vital part in the Allied victory, as the saturated ground compelled Napoleon to delay his assault on the British line until 11:45, whilst he waited for the ground to dry out sufficiently enough to make his manoeuvres easier for his men.
Beginning with the bombardment of the Allied ridge by guns amassed in the Grand Battery, Rail's Second Corps advanced to take the chateau of Hougoumont, one of 3 positions which Wellington occupied with elite troops in order to funnel French attacks along much smaller fronts.
This assault on Hougoumont, held by the Coldstream Guards, became a siege within a battle, proving to be a drain on French resources and depriving Napoleon of a crucially important body of troops who could have been put to better use elsewhere.
At around 1:30 p.m, d'Erlon's corps, totalling around 17,600 men, advanced in the first major assault on a kilometre-long section of the British line. For a time it appeared that this hammer blow would succeed in breaking through the British right, until the Union and Household Heavy Cavalry brigades launched a devastating successful charge against d'Erlon's flank, shattering much of his corps.
However, this elated success, the British cavalry overstretched themselves, charging all the way to the French lines, where they failed to immobilise the French cannons and were cut off by the French hussars and lancers.
Meanwhile, the French bombardment of the Allied ridge continued, and shortly before 4 p.m, Wellington ordered some of his forward units to pull back behind the crest of the ridge upon which they had been posted, and take shelter on the reverse slope with the remainder of the army.
It would seem that Marshal Ney mistook this for a full-scale retreat and launched a huge body of cavalry against the Allied lines. Bombarded by Allied cannons as they approached the ridge, and subsequently under fire from Allied battalions formed in squares, the French launched a series of futile charges against the Allies. Initial reports suggest that around 10,000 cavalry were deployed in this manner between 4 and 6 p.m, all to no avail.
By this point, Prussian units were arriving in the village of Poissnoire on Napoleon's right flank, having evaded a cover force sent by Napoleon under Marshal Grouchy. Over the following 3 hours, this village desperately changed hands repeatedly as Napoleon sought to hold the Prussians at arm's length while simultaneously driving the Anglo-Dutch army from the field.
A glimmer of hope emerged for Napoleon when the farm of Les Haissons fell to the French in the early evening, allowing the French to post cannon within 200 yards of the British line. Although the battery was silenced by the marksmanship of the British riflemen, this opened the way for Napoleon to launch one final assault on the British line using the elite Imperial Guard.
By chance, Napoleon's Guard were to come into contact with the British Guard as they fought General Maitland's brigade. Overwhelmed by British musketry, they were sent reeling backwards by a bayonet charge.
Such a turn of events was unthinkable for the French. Cries of La Garde recule and save yourselves whipped through the French ranks, destroying morale. with pressure increasing on the French right as ever more Prussian troops arrived, unable to commit men to a fresh attack on the British lines, and with little prospect of breaking through the Anglo-Dutch line, Napoleon fled into the night.
Total French losses amounted to approximately 25,000 killed or wounded. This compares to an Anglo-Dutch loss of around 15,000 and 7,000 Prussian soldiers killed or wounded.
Well, joining us in the studio now is our military editor, Patrick Thewlis. Welcome, Patrick. Some of our viewers may be surprised by the news of Wellington's victory, given the complaints which the British government have received in recent weeks about the quality of his army. Can you just outline to us what he was referring to?
Well, Poppy, Wellington's concern has generally been a negative one. It recently leaked letters to the other Bathurst revealed Wellington's dissatisfaction with the artillery drivers and gun troops. Also, there are only around 196 guns available for service in Belgium at this time. Wellington also being frustrated with issues over supplies. And there was recently it's looking that with the issues that we've got with supplies, that there was surprisingly many when his request to the British government was rejected.
Patrick, you've mentioned constantly Wellington's dissatisfaction with the British government. How big an issue is this for the future of the campaign?
Well, it's a massive concern when we consider the current provisions crisis. In exclusive interview with BBC Battles, Wellington said, "It appears to me that you've not taken into consideration the current situation. You do not think more certain that a great effort must be made." In another interview with a local journalist, Wellington decried his staff as inexperienced and incapable.
So how will this impact Wellington's credibility? People will inevitably ask questions about the validity of Wellington's claims, given the recent result at Waterloo.
Well, it's true that his Waterloo army was not of the same quality as that which he led at the close of the Peninsula War. Events in the New World have meant that units from that army have been deployed across the world in defence of the Empire. There have been serious concerns, though, about suitability of individuals, such as the Prince of Orange, who has twice been responsible for leading the inappropriate deployment of troops in the face of enemy cavalry over the course of the campaign. However, I doubt whether anyone will question Wellington's credibility following this victory, and it will be left for posterity to decide whether or not he was exaggerating.
Okay, Patrick Thewlis, thank you very much for joining us. Now, for the people of Belgium, such Anglo-centric concerns are of limited interest. We're now going to cross live to our European Affairs editor, George Pearce, who is in Brussels for us. George, what's the latest reaction to the news of Waterloo in the Belgian capital?
Well, Zach, in the last hour, the Baron de Capellen, the Belgian Secretary of State, has issued a new bulletin to the people of Brussels, confirming that the victory at Waterloo has been complete and decisive. The Baron of Capellen also used the bulletin to tell the inhabitants of the city to continue the superb work which they have already begun in caring for the wounded. Since April, many critics within Wellington's camp have been questioning the intentions of the Dutch and Belgians. Confusion within the camp with such rumours is creating a much disorganised situation for Wellington. In another interview with me a few months ago, Wellington confirmed that he had become aware of such rumours. Now, though, I think it is clear that there is genuine gratitude among the Belgian people for the British and Prussian troops.
And George, you mentioned the situation with the wounded. How are the medical services coping with the battle casualties?
I think it's fair to say that they simply cannot cope. It has been estimated that there are several thousand wounded soldiers of all nationalities that have arrived in the city. The Grand Place in centre of the city has essentially become an open-air hospital, and the healthcare professionals have simply been overwhelmed. Perhaps the one saving grace for the wounded is the fact that the people of Brussels have done their utmost to help. Women as young as 18 are walking in the streets, washing wounds, changing bandages and handing out refreshments. Nonetheless, there is talk of the authorities here asking the British government to send available military and civilian surgeons to Belgium in order to attend to the wounded in the following weeks.
And how have the French prisoners of war been received by the locals now that the threat to the Belgians' independence has been eradicated?
Interestingly, the French have been very well received here in Brussels. It has to be said that the Allied wounded do appear to have been prioritised over the French, but some French soldiers have received gifts from the people of Brussels as they have arrived in the city. This has caused some irritation amongst the Allied soldiers and might suggest the assistance which the Allies wounded have received is not solely due to gratitude, but it may also simply be a demonstration of the humanity of the Belgian people.
George, is there any news on the Prince of Orange's condition?
Well, there haven't been any fresh statements from the Dutch royal household on the Prince of Orange's condition yet, but hang on, I'm just getting this in. We know now that he was hit in the shoulder by a bullet from a French skirmisher late in the afternoon of the 18th. I'm getting this from sources close to the Comte de Rebecque, the prince's aide-de-camp. They're saying that the Duke's condition is serious but not life-threatening, and that he is expected to make a full recovery. Now, depending on the extent of the damage that the bullets caused to his arm, surgeons may be forced to amputate. However, we have no word on this at present.
And does this seem to be a deliberate attempt to assassinate the prince, or simply a lucky shot?
I think it's safe to say this was simply bad luck on the prince's part. Muskets are notoriously inaccurate weapons beyond a range of 100 yards.
Okay, George Pearce live in Brussels for us. Thank you very much. Now on BBC News, it's time to take a look at the print.
Joining us in the studio is Daniel Schuster, an expert in contemporary art and caricature. Dan, welcome. Let's begin with the view from France.
Well, hello, Poppy. Yes, well, we have an interesting French print to start off with. Although it's unsurprising to see that Napoleon is being ridiculed, there is a striking similarity between this print and the Teacup en Chambre, which was produced in 1814 following Napoleon's abdication.
And it's interesting that Wellington has been depicted in the same way in both prints.
Yeah, well, of course, there is very limited resemblance to reality, except for the nose, of course. Wellington was well known amongst his men for his dandyish dress sense, and he rarely wore uniform except, well, he rarely wears uniform except on formal occasions.
Even so, is it interesting that the more recent prints appear to hold Wellington solely accountable for Napoleon's current plight? Do you think this will become a dominant theme in the way in which the battle is perceived by the public?
Well, in truth, it's too early to be sure. We might expect such an attitude from the British prince, but as you say, it's an interesting point.
And what do we have from Britain? I'm assuming this is a British print we have on the screen now.
Yeah, well, this is a lecture on heads as delivered by Marshals Wellington and Blucoat, as you can see on the bottom there. Interestingly, it's interesting that it's Wellington that's in the act of killing a Frenchman whilst Blucher trails behind.
And am I right in thinking that we've seen a similar sentiment in British prints before?
Well, absolutely. James Gilray's 1808 print, Spanish patriots attacking the French banditti, again visible on the bottom there. Again, it's the British grenadier that's in the act of killing the Frenchman, which suggests that British attitudes have not changed that significantly.
But equally, there is something to be said about the contribution of the Prussians actually being acknowledged.
Yeah, you're right, and that's visible in our last print. This also includes Blucher, and he's working together with Wellington to beat Napoleon, quite literally. This suggests that this caricaturist really is acknowledging the value of the Prussians.
Well, now it's time to take a look at the reaction of the British newspapers to news of Waterloo.
Well, yes, the Morning Post has a proposal from a reader about a subscription to raise money for those left without fathers or husbands by the battle. This reader suggests that each parish provide one officer to collect the funds. Large-scale, small donations, as little as £6, would raise a huge amount to support those widowed or orphaned by the battle.
And interestingly, the Morning Chronicle has also gone with a discussion of the relief for the widows and orphans left behind by the battle. A very noble effort indeed.
Yes, but there has been some discussion as to who exactly should be covered by this relief. I mean, should it just include those British soldiers involved in the battle, or should it also include the Belgians and the King's German Legion, for example? As yet, there seems to have been no decision.
Well, thank you for joining us, Daniel Schuster.
And that is the news this Saturday lunchtime. Coming up next on BBC Battles, it's Battle Gear. But on behalf of everybody here at the BBC News team, goodbye.